Join me, Terry Wogan, in London's Hyde Park on Saturday the 9th of September with guests including Lionel Richie, Ankela Georgiou, Alison Balsom and the BBC Concert Orchestra for BBC Proms in the Park.
Harry George is convicted of killing Jill Dando.
He was jailed as a result of one of the largest murder investigations in the history of the Metropolitan Police Force. But is he really guilty?
This kind of evidence should not have been used.
Jill Dando's murder, the new evidence. A Panorama special, tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
This is BBC One in the East Midlands. Now the news with Hugh Edwards and Colin Hazelden.
A British tourist is shot dead in Jordan and several others are injured. The group of Westerners say they were attacked by a man shouting "God is great" as he opened fire.
I just turned around and just saw this man pointing a gun at, just pointing a gun at us. And I got shot. I don't remember much about it.
Tony Blair says the attack is another example of the threat of global terrorism. Also tonight, another 3 British soldiers killed in attacks in Afghanistan and in Iraq. The Australian broadcaster Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, has died on a filming assignment. And the world's tourist trade adjusts to 100 million Chinese visitors.
Here in the East Midlands, our special investigation into the growing number of schools who just can't find a head teacher. And the dentist who extracted cash from the NHS avoids prison.
Good evening. A British tourist was shot dead in Amman today and several others injured by a Jordanian gunman. The attack, according to Tony Blair, must be seen alongside other incidents today where British servicemen lost their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mr. Blair said they were all examples of the terrorist threat. In Jordan, the British tourist was shot as he visited an amphitheatre. At least 5 others were wounded, including 2 British women. The gunman shouted, "God is great," as he opened fire. In Afghanistan, a British soldier was killed and another seriously wounded in a suicide bombing in Kabul. And in Iraq, 2 British soldiers were killed there and another 2 injured in a roadside bombing near Basra. First tonight, that attack in Jordan, and we can join Matthew Price in Amman.
Hugh, as you said, that shooting here in the capital, Amman, took place at one of Jordan's top tourist attractions, a Roman amphitheatre. Tourism is a vital money earner for the Jordanian economy, and there are fears here tonight that many visitors are going to be scared off. There was blood on the flagstones of the Roman ruins today. Jordan likes to think of itself as a safe tourist destination. It doesn't look it anymore. The police quickly sealed off the area. A gunman had fired a number of shots at a group of tourists. One British man was killed. They took the injured to hospital. Some were clearly still in shock.
We were walking up some stairs at a theatre and a man came up behind us and started to shoot. And all I can remember is one of my friends falling over. And then a really nice man from a shop came and told us to hide in his store. And we could just hear him shooting.
His Majesty sends all his best wishes to you.
Nearby, on her bed, lay Karen Spark, one of the British women who was injured. A government minister was visiting her. He knows this is highly damaging for his country's tourism industry.
And I got shot. I don't remember much about it, just that we got shot. And then as I looked, it was my other friends were on the laying down. And then I went up the steps a bit further and stood around the corner and then realised that I was bleeding.
This evening we visited a bar in Amman. Life goes on, but there is inevitably concern here.
Hurting people or killing people to actually raise your voice or send out a message is not right. So these things surprise me, whatever they happen, if they happen here or anywhere else.
I'm sure that the guy who did the whole incident is like somebody who's full of frustration and anger, and to him this is like a way to express how he feels, basically.
Anger about what?
Anger about the whole situation in the Middle East.
The police are guarding the scene of the shooting tonight. The Foreign Office has advised British nationals that in Jordan, Westerners risk being targeted. That is not something this normally hospitable country wishes to hear. Now, this is not the first attack that there has been against tourists here in Jordan over the years, and in fact if you go to many of the hotels here in the capital Amman, you'll see security outside, men with guns trying to make sure that no attackers come nearby. But what today's shooting shows is, I think, that you certainly can't, whatever the level of security, prevent every single attack.
Matthew, thank you very much. And as Matthew was hinting there, last November, a multiple suicide bombing in Amman left 60 people dead. Since then, security has been reinforced as Jordan seeks to protect its very important tourist trade. So what more do we know about today's attack? Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, is here.
Until recently, Jordan had appeared relatively calm, but now it's the latest country to face a growing threat from terrorism. Its tranquility was first shattered last November when a trio of suicide bombers blew themselves up in the lobbies of Western hotels. Although most of the victims were Jordanian, Iraqis linked to Al-Qaeda were responsible for that attack. But today, the attacker was a local Jordanian. Nabil Juara came from the streets of this town called Zarqa, the hometown of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the terrorist leader recently killed in Iraq.
It is a Jordanian man, and this is the first occasion that we have a Jordanian involved in this. It is, again, a spillover of what's been happening in the region. We don't know the background of the man now until today. It would be interesting to find out who is he tied to and who pushed him to do it.
So why has terrorism come to Jordan, and why are Westerners the target? Jordan occupies a key strategic position in an unstable region with conflicts on all sides. It has been one of the United States' closest allies in the region. This was Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice meeting Jordan's king last year. However, anti-American feeling has been on the rise. In 1994, Jordan became one of the few Arab countries to recognize its neighbor Israel. But not everyone is happy with that. The country has a large population of displaced Palestinians, and there's been anger over recent events in Lebanon. Also, the ongoing bloodshed in neighbouring Iraq has increased anti-Western sentiment and raised fears that the violence could spill over the border. The Jordanian government tonight said it thought today's shooting was the work of a lone gunman, but concerns remain that Jordan is increasingly a target for terrorists. Hugh.
Gordon, thank you very much. Well, the Prime Minister condemned the shooting in Jordan and paid tribute to the 17 British soldiers who've died in the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq over the past few days. He said all of these incidents were related to global terrorism.
In almost every single different part of the areas of the world where there are problems, this global terrorism is operating, and we should be very grateful and very proud of the fact that we've got the British Armed Forces prepared to stand up and to do this work, which is immensely difficult but absolutely vital, not just for people in Afghanistan or the other countries where our troops are operating, but actually for our own security.
Prime Minister speaking earlier today. Well, the Ministry of Defence said this evening that the soldier killed in Afghanistan today was a member of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. Another soldier is seriously injured after the suicide attack on a patrol in Kabul. Roland Burke is there and he sent this report.
The attack came on a busy road on the outskirts of the capital. A suicide bomber blew up his car as a NATO convoy was driving past. A British soldier was killed and another seriously wounded. Bystanders were also caught up in the blast. Their bodies were bundled into the back of taxis. The police tried to clear away crowds, fearful of another attack. And firefighters hosed the blood off the street. Suicide bombings have become increasingly common in Afghanistan. NATO believes the Taliban may be copying tactics from Iraq.
Suicide bombs are still a relatively new phenomenon in Afghanistan. They certainly have our attention, and we're not without means to prevent them. We work very closely with the Afghan police, checkpoint operations, and knowing who's behind these bombs and then trying to exploit them is an important part of it. We have not seen that many in the capital, and we certainly don't wish to see more.
Since Saturday, NATO forces have been fighting pitched battles alongside the Afghan National Army. The objective, to drive the Taliban from Panjshir district. For months, it was their stronghold. More than 200 Taliban fighters have been killed, according to NATO. 4,500 British troops are deployed in southern Afghanistan. Commanders say it's a tough mission.
We are stretched, but we can manage, and it's our job as the Chiefs of Staff and the Chief of the Defence Staff to make sure that we manage those pinch trades and capabilities that we may be experiencing.
NATO says it is making considerable progress in its operation in Panjshir, but as this suicide bombing shows, Afghanistan is still far from secure. Roland Burke, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, the death of 2 British soldiers in a roadside bombing in Iraq has raised further questions about the level of equipment used by British troops and whether it's enough to fight insurgents with their increasingly sophisticated weaponry. From Iraq, David Loyne reports now.
This Land Rover was hit as British troops were escorting construction workers north of Basra this morning. Wreckage was strewn across the road in an area where there have been similar attacks before. A Danish medical team with their military escort were quickly on the scene. But the force of the explosion had already done its worst. The Land Rovers, pictured here last week, are known as Snatches by the army, a name left over from Northern Ireland where they were used for snatch squads to make quick arrests. But this war is much tougher than Northern Ireland, and controversy is growing over whether British troops have enough protection for this environment. Especially now insurgents here have learnt how to make so-called shaped bombs. The armour on a Snatch Land Rover might give protection from a normal explosion, but shaped bombs are designed to focus the force of the explosive into a small area, forcing a hard projectile through the light armour of a Snatch Land Rover. The insurgents may have learnt the technology from Iran. Matthew Bacon died in an explosion like this on September the 11th last year.
My son was murdered in a Snatch Land Rover almost exactly a year ago. He was the 8th that this has happened to. There have now been 20. I feel extremely angry that this is still going on.
The new Defence Secretary saw the vehicles here for himself only last week, but there are no easy answers for Britain's stretched armed forces.
Britain is reducing its military commitment to Iraq, but commanders say they will not withdraw until Iraqi forces are competent to take on the threat. That time does not look as if it's coming very soon. David Loyne, BBC News, Baghdad.
Well, let's talk to our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, who joins us from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Jeremy, Prime Minister, very clear today what's happened in Jordan, he says, and what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, all part of the same picture. How do you assess it?
Well, it's one of the most complicated and controversial and important questions in international politics at the moment. I think we can say definitely that Western military intervention in the Middle East and in Afghanistan since 2001 has increased anti-Western feeling. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 has unleashed a chain of consequences which is going to take a generation to unfold. We can also say that in every country where there are Muslims, there's political Islam. Some creeds of political Islam, Al-Qaeda type ideologies, for example, believe in violent confrontation with the West. Others do not. Some try to join up all the dots in the region, and others deal with specifically local issues. What they tend to have in common is that they are a response to what's seen as decades of failure by other political creeds. The last thing we need to say about all this, I think, is that when we talk about the Arab and Muslim worlds, we're dealing with a huge slice of the globe, going from Africa through the Middle East, right into the heart of Asia. It's very difficult, I think, for journalists and for policymakers to make generalizations about such a big part of the earth.
Jeremy Bowen in Beirut, thank you very much. Coming up on tonight's programme, The Good Life, how China's booming economy means holidays in the sun for millions of Chinese tourists. Steve Irwin, Australia's very popular television personality and naturalist, has died on a filming assignment. The man known by many as the crocodile hunter was stung in the chest by a stingray while working off the coast of Queensland. The Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, said his country had lost a wonderful, colourful son, as Louisa Baldini reports.
Have a go at this whopper!
He was passionate and he was fearless. Steve Irwin was the real-life Crocodile Dundee. And when he was on television, you couldn't fail but to stop and watch his dramatic style.
Oh, he's bit me. That's it. I've been bitten, but...
Steve Irwin courted danger, but in the end it was a relatively unaggressive creature that took his life. A stingray as he was filming sequences for his latest documentary off the Queensland coast.
Today the world has lost a great wildlife icon, a passionate conservationist, and one of the proudest dads on the planet. He died what he loved doing best.
As fans lay flowers at the entrance to his zoo, news of Steve Irwin's death even prompted a tribute from the Australian Prime Minister.
He was a one-off character, and he wasn't just a character for Australians, he was a character for lots of people around the world.
There are many species of stingrays in the Australian waters, but it's extremely rare that they cause deaths. In fact, Steve Irwin is only the third person known to have been killed by a stingray in Australia, so it could be said that this was a freak accident. Now, normally these are placid creatures. It's only if they're stepped on or provoked that they will lash out with their tails, which conceal a razor-sharp, poisonous barb. Steve Irwin will be remembered as a showman. His energetic performances in front of the camera got him noticed around the world. But he also prompted controversy when in 2004 he included his month-old son in one of his routines.
Everyone has accidents, and in the end, I'm afraid, as sad as it is, I have to be pragmatic and say that you can't continue to aggravate aggressive animals as he did, and finally not get bitten, scratched or stung by one.
But Steve Irwin also leaves a legacy as a genuine naturalist. Along with his wife Terry, he invested much of his earnings into breeding programs for all kinds of animals.
What's your fate, buddy?
The most important thing was he was a very, very good natural historian. He did not need scripts, he knew his animals.
But to get as close to them as he wanted, this time he paid with his life. Louisa Baldini, BBC News.
A rapist who kept his victims' shoes as trophies has been jailed for life. Police believe that James Lloyd attacked at least 10 women in South Yorkshire during the 1980s. He was finally caught using the latest DNA techniques, as Mark Simpson reports.
For 20 years, James Lloyd lived a lie, pretending to be an innocent, hard-working family man, hiding his past as a serial rapist with a fetish for high-heeled shoes. This was his secret collection, and it included stilettos which he stole from his victims after he raped them. He was caught using the latest techniques in forensic science, which allow police to trace suspects through the DNA of members of their family. James Lloyd had a clean record and had never given a DNA sample, but there were 40 close matches to him on the national database. That meant that rather than having to search the whole of South Yorkshire, police simply had to interview 40 people, and the third door they knocked on was a sister of James Lloyd. The net was closing in, and detectives quickly realised that with the help of that groundbreaking technology, they'd finally found their man. He later confessed to 4 rapes and 2 attempted rapes in Barnsley and Rotherham in the mid-1980s. Today he was given a life sentence.
James Desmond Lloyd is a cowardly individual who fully deserves to serve a long custodial sentence, dwelling upon the crimes he committed. We are relieved that this cannot happen to any other woman.
But police believe 4 others at least may have been attacked.
We've recovered a vast number of shoes, and they are used shoes, and there is one train of thought that a lot of those are from other victims.
With the passage of time, the reality is that the full extent of James Lloyd's crimes may never be known. Mark Simpson, BBC News, Sheffield.
The BBC has learned that DHL, the German-owned courier company, has won a 10-year contract to manage the £22 billion purchasing budget of the NHS. The deal is thought to be the largest ever privatisation of part of the NHS. Our business editor, Robert Peston, has the story. He's with me. Robert, what have you learned?
Well, what I've learned, Hugh, is that this huge outsourcing privatisation deal has been signed today. What it involves is DHL, a company that most of us know best for delivering parcels, but actually does a lot of outsourcing. It will manage some 22 billion of hospital purchases, NHS spending over 10 years. Now, it believes that it can make savings over those 10 years for all of us of £1 billion, taxpayers' money. However, that purchasing at the moment is carried out by a part of the NHS, so 1,700 NHS employees are going to be transferring to the private sector. Now, the unions, are very worried about that, and in fact they're balloting their members about strike action, and in fact a strike could take place even before the new contract begins, which is on the 1st of October.
I mean, clearly these things are very controversial politically. When the argument takes place, what will the main pros and cons be?
Well, the pros and cons stack up like this. On the one hand, public sector employees who are being transferred to the private sector are going to be concerned that their terms and conditions are going to deteriorate, they're going to be worried about their pensions. DHL says it will protect pensions, they'll all be treated well. Another issue, plainly, is that in the process of making savings on this scale, people are going to be concerned that DHL will cut the quality of the goods and equipment that are being supplied. I mean, we're talking here about everything from linen to food to really high-tech equipment like MRI scanners, and plainly none of us would want to see the quality of that kind of thing deteriorating. Finally, of course, there are those people who see this as part of the creeping privatisation of the NHS and who believe that something valuable in terms of the public service ethos is being lost through these sorts of deals. Now, against all of that, there is a long history of the private sector being better at buying things at the best price than the public sector. So if it does all work out, all of us should, in theory, be a bit better off.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much. The world tourist industry has begun to feel the impact of 100 million Chinese who are now rich enough to holiday abroad. Resorts are being specifically designed to cater for Chinese tastes, and guides are learning Mandarin. Many Chinese holidaymakers are heading for Thailand, where the nightlife, for one thing anyway, is unlike any back home in China, as Andrew Harding reports.
They've got matching beach towels and money to burn, and they're coming soon to a resort near you. Chinese tourists are poised to take the world by storm. Here in Thailand, they've already taken over whole islands. That's Ni Zheng coming into land. She's a music teacher who grew up thinking she'd never travel abroad. Suddenly the world is opening up. Millions like her can now afford these cheap package tours. Ni Zheng is here on her honeymoon.
Yeah, very beautiful.
She tells me it's her first time at the seaside. My husband's a computer engineer and our incomes are growing fast, so now it's easy to travel overseas. And millions are grabbing that chance, eager to explore a world that used to be off limits. As with so much about China these days, it's the sheer numbers that are breathtaking. Before long, there will be 100 million Chinese with the money and the opportunity to travel abroad as tourists every year. Next stop, Bangkok. Tin Guo-Nyan is a taxi driver from Shanghai. He's taking his family on their first foreign holiday. A few years ago, his modest salary would never have stretched this far. But now he's giddy with excitement. Very good, very good. Chinese tourists are still treated warily in some places. They're seen as rude and cheap. But Tin Guo-Nyan insists that was when we were poor. Now we've lost our bad habits. The rest of the bus agrees. Mr. Tin is now aiming to take his family to Britain next year. And so a battle has begun. Countries competing over China's tourist market. Thailand is pulling out all the stops with lavish video promotions like this one, and a frenzy of Mandarin lessons for tour guides.
Ni hao. Ni hao. It's a huge market. And I think that you have to be on your toes a lot for this piece of the pie.
Any advice for Britain, for Europe?
You cannot just sit back and wait for them to come. You have to go out into China, to the various, even to the provincial level, you know, to promote your stuff.
And this is the stuff which seems to go down best in Thailand. Bangkok's famous ladyboy shows. Full houses every night, packed with thousands of wide-eyed Chinese tourists. The transsexual performers now mime the very latest Chinese melodies. Outside, a chance to mingle. Thanks to China, the ladyboy industry here is booming like never before.
Have you learned to speak Chinese?
Yes.
It's good for business?
Yes, it's good.
And Tim, the Chinese taxi driver, seems to be having the time of his life. London will have to wait. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Bangkok.
10 o'clock news hour continues on BBC News 24 with tomorrow's papers, the business roundup, and in Sports Day at 10:30. The feud between Chelsea and their former French defender, William Gallas, deepens with a sensational statement from the Premiership champions. And on BBC One, I'll be back with the headlines after we joined our news teams where you are. Bye for now.
Good evening. A special East Midlands Today investigation has found that more and more schools have no head teacher. Figures obtained under the Freedom of Information Act show that 47 schools in the region have had to re-advertise because they couldn't find anyone suitable. Our education correspondent Matt Udell reports.
Witherley Church of England Primary near Hinckley in Leicestershire, the seat of learning for 73 pupils aged 4 to 11. Happy, vibrant, a popular village school. Debbie Gibson's taught here for 6 years. She's now temporarily in charge because when the school sought a head teacher, no one applied.
It's very difficult. My workload at the moment is very heavy, but I'm very lucky because at Witherley I've got a very strong, supportive staff.
Everybody knows that being a head teacher is a very stressful job, very time-consuming, and in smaller schools, the added problem of having to teach for 60% of the week and also do the management side is quite challenging.
John Inningworth was a head teacher in Nottingham for more than 20 years. As of this week, he's retired. For him, the job became too much, something he admitted very publicly.
I think I've been a good head and a good teacher, but for me, enough's enough. See me off.
It's very stressful. There's a huge amount of pressure on you. You generally get blamed for anything that goes wrong, and it's just not an attractive job.
Witherley Primary will re-advertise their head teacher vacancy on Friday. Debbie Gibson's hoping for a better response than last time. Matt Udell, East Midlands Today, Leicestershire.
A dentist who plotted to defraud the NHS has been given a 12-month suspended jail sentence. In the words of the judge, Mohammed Sheikh from Nottingham cynically manipulated the expenses rules. After an earlier civil hearing, he repaid more than £1 million in expenses.
It's taken years of police investigation. Sheikh seen here in the 1990s, a decade when he led a plot to fiddle NHS expenses. This building at Sneinton in Nottingham used to be part of his empire. It's now under new ownership. In Sneinton, he set about manipulating emergency call-out expenses. The prosecution said he claimed for opening up the surgeries when they were effectively open anyway.
Sheikh admitted conspiracy to defraud the NHS halfway through his trial. The judge, in passing sentence, said he'd cynically manipulated the regulations and in doing so had destroyed his good character and brought dentistry into disrepute.
The 39-year-old barrister said Sheikh offered an emergency service few dentists were interested in. Today he has 13 new practices in the East Midlands, offering NHS care to people who might not otherwise get it. Dentistry's governing body will now decide whether Sheikh will be struck off. On top of the 12-month suspended prison sentence, Sheikh was fined £50,000 and he'll have to pay £100,000 in prosecution costs. He told the court he'd pay the money within 7 days. Rob Sissons, East Midlands Today at Northampton Crown Court.
A controversial new centre for asylum seekers and refugees opened today. The Immigration Office at Loughborough in Leicestershire will serve the whole of the East Midlands. Asylum seekers will have to travel there to register and will then be given advice and have applications processed. Local people say they fear it could lead to an increase in crime. Could the phone number 101 become as familiar as 999? The idea is that you'll dial it for less urgent problems. 101's being trialled in Leicester and Rutland. People will be able to use it to report crimes like antisocial behaviour and graffiti. It's hoped it'll cut the numbers of non-emergency calls coming through on 999. Now a story with a proper happy ending. It starts with Phil Staples, who was shocked to suddenly find 4 horses grazing on his front lawn. He had no idea where they were from or who owned them, but under the law they became his responsibility. Quentin Rayner takes up the tale.
Phil Staples still can't quite believe his eyes. His Christian name may mean lover of horses, but you don't expect 4 to turn up on your doorstep unannounced on a Sunday morning.
Somebody had shut the gate at the bottom of my drive, and I undid it and drove straight up my drive. And when I came to the top just here, I saw these 4 horses. I couldn't believe it. I thought I was seeing things. I hadn't even had my breakfast. I thought I must be hallucinating.
No horses are missing locally, so Phil believes they've been abandoned. Horseplay has left his bird bath smashed, barricades have gone up to protect his back garden, and his Cottam home near Newark is now full of fruit. That's because, after a call to the RSPCA, Phil has been frantically picking anything edible.
I'm told by the RSPCA that I am now technically responsible for these animals. A, they get drunk, and B, they could get bloat. And so we don't want that to happen because I'll be responsible for the veterinary bills, which could amount to thousands.
Who says the law's an ass? And poor old Phil has also been hard at work on the ground.
I hadn't intended to do this on my day off, but needs must.
For a man whose only pet is a goldfish, home on the ranch has taken on a whole new meaning.
I knew I should have watched The Horse Whisperer. Come on.
Well, we've just heard that after that report first went out, the owners of the horses came forward. They'd been frantic after the animals were apparently stolen, but tonight they've been reunited. Now then, the weather. Here's Sarah.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we could just see a taste of summer returning again this week, and we've got quite a humid night tonight. A bit of a divide, though, with rain towards the north of the region and just a lot of cloud cover to the south. But look at those temperatures, a minimum of 16 Celsius in the south of the region. A cloudy start to tomorrow and a bit of a drizzly start to Tuesday, but it is going to be a warm day. Once that sun starts to make an appearance, those temperatures will soon start to increase. I think highs of around 25 Celsius, that's 77 Fahrenheit.
Thanks very much indeed, Sarah. That's all from the late team. Hope to see you again tomorrow evening. Good night.
Tonight's main news. A British tourist has been shot dead in Jordan. Several others were injured in the attack when a gunman opened fire in Amman, shouting, "God is great." That's it from the 10 o'clock team. Have a very good night.
Adrian Chiles and Nadia Sawala show you how to play the system to get the best deals on train tickets. The One Show tomorrow at 5 to 7 on BBC One.
Good evening. Well, I was in a bit of a dilemma as to which globe to use behind me tonight because there's going to be huge contrast in our weather tomorrow. Wet for some, warm and sunny for others. Certainly fairly high temperatures out there. In the sunshine it will feel warm and pretty humid for most of us too. Now that humidity is creating some mist along Channel coasts in particular overnight tonight. It's going to be a very misty, murky affair. A lot of cloud, as you can see, and some rain pushing out of North Wales into northwest England and particularly Northern Ireland. A wet night here, and that rain extending into a good part of central and southern Scotland later on tonight. The bright colours here indicating some fairly heavy rain out west as well. Temperatures, well, certainly on the mild and muggy side in the south, no lower than 17 or 18 degrees. But let's concentrate on that rain further north. It's going to be a wet old day for a good part of Scotland, away from the far north. Quite a deluge, really. Out west, certainly we could see 1 or 2 inches of rain when all is said and done. It's going to be a wet start to the working day, certainly for the Glasgow, Edinburgh area. Here, a bit of a wet and soggy affair, and that rain's going to stay put, I think, for much of the day. The rain will linger for a time across the Scottish borders, but it'll clear its way northwards slowly, and for much of northern England it'll be a dry start. A fair amount of cloud around, but hope that that cloud will start to break up, certainly across the Midlands and East Anglia as we go through the morning. Along the south coast, so it stays rather misty throughout the day, although I'm hopeful that in Southampton for the England versus Pakistan game we should get a full day's play. Still misty around the coasts of Devon and Cornwall, but again inland hopefully that cloud will start to break up, and a similar picture for Wales, and where the sun does come out it'll feel quite warm. Dry for a time across County Down, perhaps County Armagh, but to the northwest we'll have that rain from the word go, and signs that later on in the day it'll start to swivel and head back southeastwards. Certainly for Scotland though, it's going to be wet for much of the day. The heaviest of the rain just pushing north of the central belt, I think, by the afternoon. But the sun appearing across the inland parts of England and Wales, and temperatures certainly responding to that. 26, 27 degrees, that's into the 80s Fahrenheit. Pretty good for early September. Much cooler, of course, under the rain. Now on Wednesday that rain's going to start to stagger its way southwards again. A wet day for Northern Ireland in particular. A little bit drier for the northern half of Scotland, but to the brightest of the skies again across East Anglia and the southeast, and once more it's going to be a very warm day. A lot of uncertainty, I have to say, about developments at the end of the week. To stay up to date with things then, why not visit our website? That's it from me. A very good night to you.